My sister begged me to lie to her husband about her whereabouts and is now testifying I helped her plan his murder. The detective showed me the text message on his phone during our interview at the police station. Your sister says you sent this to her 3 weeks before Trevor's death. Can you explain what it means? The message read, "I'll cover for you. Don't worry about anything. He'll never know." I stared at my own words from my phone, sent at 11:43 p.m. on a Wednesday in late September. Detective Rains was watching me carefully, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. I was 32 years old, worked as an architect for a mid-sized firm downtown, and until 5 days ago had never been inside a police station except to renew my driver's license. Now I was sitting in an interrogation room being asked about my involvement in my brother-in-law's murder. My sister called me that night crying, I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. She said Trevor was being controlling about her taking a ceramics class. She wanted to go, but he'd forbidden it. She asked if I'd tell him she was at my apartment if he called looking for her. I said yes because it seemed harmless. She's my sister. Detective Rains wrote something in his notebook. Trevor Boswell was found dead in his garage on October 18th with a fatal head wound. Your sister Vanessa claims you helped her plan his death because you hated him and wanted to help her escape an abusive marriage. She says this text is evidence you were willing to lie and cover for her, establishing a pattern of conspiracy. My mouth went dry. That's insane. I sent that text about a ceramics class. Trevor died 3 weeks later. How is that connected? Detective Rains pulled out another document. Vanessa says you met with her 4 times in the weeks before Trevor's death to discuss ways to make it look like an accident. She says you researched how to stage a fall in a garage. She says you provided her with specific instructions on where to position his body and what to tell the police. I felt the room spinning. Vanessa and I had always been close despite our 6-year age gap. She was 26, had married Trevor when she was 23, and I'd been happy for her at the wedding. Trevor had seemed decent enough, an electrician with his own small business, respectful to our parents, good to Vanessa. But over the past year, she'd called me several times complaining about his jealousy and control. He didn't want her working. He monitored her phone. He got angry when she spent money without asking. I'd listened and offered support, but I'd never suggested she leave him, much less helped her kill him. I never met with Vanessa to plan anything, I said firmly. I talked to her on the phone when she was upset about Trevor, but we talked about normal things, her classes, her pottery, whether she should get marriage counseling. Detective Rains leaned forward. Did you ever tell her that Trevor's behavior was dangerous? That she needed to protect herself? I tried to remember exact conversations. Maybe something general. When someone's describing controlling behavior, you say things that sound supportive. But I never told her to hurt him. The detective opened a folder and slid several printed pages across the table. These are phone records showing you and Vanessa talked 27 times in the month before Trevor's death. Some calls lasted over an hour. Text messages show you saying things about Trevor being toxic and that Vanessa deserved better. In one text, you wrote, "You don't have to live with someone who makes you miserable." She's using all of this to build a case that you were coaching her toward murder. I read through the texts, my own words sounding sinister in this new context. I'd been trying to be a supportive brother. Vanessa would call crying about Trevor's latest outburst, and I'd reassure her that she deserved to be happy. How had that become conspiracy to commit murder? Where was I when Trevor died? I asked, grasping for solid ground. If Vanessa is claiming I helped her, I must have an alibi for the actual time of death. Detective Rains checked his notes. Trevor died between 8 and 10 p.m. on October 18th. Where were you? I pulled out my phone and scrolled back to that date. I was at a client dinner, Riverside Restaurant with Robert Garfield from Garfield Development. We met at 7:30, and I got home around 10:45. There will be credit card records. The restaurant will remember us. Robert can confirm everything. The detective wrote this down, but didn't look relieved. Vanessa isn't claiming you were physically present at the murder. She's claiming you planned it with her, and she executed it alone. The physical evidence shows Trevor fell and hit his head on his workbench in the garage. There was a puddle of motor oil on the floor that he apparently slipped in. Vanessa called 911 at 9:15 p.m. saying she'd found him unconscious. He died before the ambulance arrived. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this. So what exactly is Vanessa saying I did? Detective Rains met my eyes. She's saying you researched how to stage an accidental fall, that you told her to spill motor oil on the garage floor and call Trevor out there on some pretext, that you explained exactly how the scene should look to avoid suspicion, and that you promised to support her story afterward, which is what this text about covering for her was establishing. She's saying you masterminded the entire thing. My hands were shaking. Why would Vanessa say this? Why would she kill Trevor and then blame me? The detective's expression suggested this was the question he most wanted answered. Your sister was arrested yesterday based on forensic evidence that doesn't match her story. The medical examiner found inconsistencies suggesting Trevor didn't just slip and fall. There were signs he was struck first and then positioned to look like he'd fallen. When confronted with this evidence, Vanessa confessed to killing Trevor, but immediately said you'd helped her plan it. She gave us detailed descriptions of conversations you allegedly had, places you allegedly met, things you allegedly told her to do. I felt sick. She's lying. She killed Trevor, and now she's trying to drag me down with her. But why? Why would she do this to me? Detective Rains closed his folder. Sometimes accomplices turn on each other when caught. Sometimes people lie to reduce their own culpability. Sometimes desperate people sacrifice anyone to save themselves. The question is, can you prove she's lying? I thought frantically. Yes. Whatever meetings she's describing never happened. Whatever specific planning conversations she claims we had, they're false. I can prove where I was on the dates she's talking about. The detective stood up. You should get a lawyer, Mr. Whitmore. Your sister is very convincing and she has explanations for everything. This text message, the phone calls, your previous statements about Trevor being controlling, they all support her version of events. Unless you can definitively prove you weren't involved, the district attorney might decide there's enough evidence to charge you as an accessory to murder. He left me alone in the interrogation room for 15 minutes. I sat there trying to understand how my life had fallen apart so completely. 5 days ago, I'd been grieving Trevor's death and supporting Vanessa through her loss. Now I was facing murder charges because my sister had decided to frame me for a crime she'd committed alone. When Detective Rains returned, he handed me a business card for a criminal defense attorney named Laura Voss. Call her today. Don't talk to anyone else about this case. Don't contact your sister. Don't post anything on social media. And don't leave town. I took the card with numb fingers. Am I under arrest? He shook his head. Not yet. But that could change quickly depending on what the DA decides. Vanessa is being very cooperative and giving us a lot of detail. The more she talks, the worse you look. I left the police station in a daze and drove directly to Laura Voss's office. Her receptionist squeezed me in for an emergency consultation that afternoon. Laura was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s, with gray-streaked hair and an air of someone who'd seen everything. I explained the entire situation while she took notes. When I finished, she sat back and studied me. Your sister is facing first-degree murder charges. If convicted, she's looking at life in prison. By claiming you were involved, she accomplishes 2 things. First, she shares the blame, which makes her look less culpable. Second, if she can convince a jury that you were the mastermind and she was manipulated or coerced, she might get a reduced sentence. I felt anger rising. So she's willing to send me to prison to save herself? Laura nodded. Family members betray each other all the time when facing serious consequences. The question is whether we can prove she's lying before the DA decides to charge you. She pulled out a legal pad. Let's go through every interaction you had with Vanessa in the 6 months before Trevor's death. Every phone call, every text, every meeting. We need to build a timeline that shows you were being a supportive brother, not a co-conspirator. We spent 3 hours reconstructing my relationship with Vanessa. The calls where she'd complained about Trevor's jealousy. The texts where I'd encouraged her to consider counseling. The one time I'd met her for coffee and she'd cried about feeling trapped. Every conversation had been me trying to support her through a difficult marriage. None of it had been about planning murder. But I could see how Vanessa was twisting everything. The coffee meeting where we'd discussed her feeling trapped. She'd claimed I told her the only way out was to get rid of Trevor. The text saying, he'll never know? She said it was about the murder plan, not a ceramics class. The phone calls about Trevor's controlling behavior? She said I was building her psychological case for why killing him was justified. The problem, Laura explained, is that you can't prove what was actually said in those conversations. It's your word against hers. And she's the one who killed someone, so paradoxically, her testimony carries weight because she's already admitted guilt. She's not trying to avoid responsibility for the murder itself. She's just saying you were involved in planning it. I felt trapped. What about the text she's referencing? Can't we prove that was about a ceramics class? Laura made a note. Did she actually attend a ceramics class that night? Can anyone verify that's what she was doing? I tried to remember. She said she was going to a class at the community center. I assumed she went. I never asked for details afterward. Laura looked concerned. So we can't actually prove the text was about an innocent lie regarding a class. For all we know, she was somewhere else that night doing something related to planning Trevor's death, and you provided her an alibi without knowing it. The implications hit me. You're saying she might have used me to establish a pattern of me lying for her, knowing she could later claim those lies were about the murder? Laura nodded grimly. It's possible she's been setting this up for weeks. That text is dated 3 weeks before Trevor's death. If she was already planning to kill him at that point, getting you to agree to lie for her about anything establishes you as someone willing to be complicit in deception. It's actually clever, in a horrifying way. I felt my world crumbling. But I didn't know. How can I be charged with conspiracy if I didn't know what I was agreeing to? Laura explained the legal complexities. Intent matters, but so does reasonable suspicion. If the DA believes you should have known something was wrong, if they think you were willfully ignorant, they can still charge you. And Vanessa is apparently giving them very specific details about things you allegedly said. Unless you can prove those conversations never happened or happened differently, you're in serious trouble. Over the next week, Laura and I worked frantically to build my defense. We subpoenaed my work calendar, showing I'd been at the office or meeting clients during times Vanessa claimed we'd met to discuss the murder plan. We pulled my credit card records, showing I'd been at restaurants and stores across town during alleged planning sessions. We contacted the community center about Vanessa's ceramics class and learned she'd only attended twice, both before the text message in question. The night I'd agreed to cover for her, there was no class scheduled. She'd lied to me about where she was going. This revelation felt like another betrayal. So where was she that night? I asked Laura. She'd hired a private investigator who'd been digging into Vanessa's activities. We're not sure yet, but your sister's phone records show she was in the vicinity of a hardware store that night. She purchased zip ties, heavy-duty gloves, and a tarp using cash. The store's security footage confirms it was her. My stomach turned. She was buying murder supplies while I thought she was taking a pottery class. Laura's expression was grim. It appears your sister has been planning this for much longer than we initially thought. The question is whether the DA will believe you had no knowledge of her real activities. The district attorney, a career prosecutor named Robert Finch, called a meeting with Laura to discuss potential charges against me. I sat in Laura's office while she went to the DA's office, waiting for news that would determine whether I'd be arrested. She returned 3 hours later looking exhausted. Finch is considering charging you as an accessory after the fact, if not conspiracy. Vanessa has given them a statement that's very detailed and very damaging. She claims you told her that if she was careful, Trevor's death would look accidental and no one would investigate. She says you explained that staging a slip and fall in a garage was the perfect method because everyone knows garages are dangerous places. I wanted to scream. I never said any of that. I never talked about staging accidents or making deaths look natural. Vanessa is inventing these conversations. Laura held up a hand. I know. But here's the problem. Vanessa is willing to testify to all of this under oath. And she's very credible. She's young. She cries at appropriate moments. She seems genuinely remorseful about Trevor's death. The jury will see a scared young woman who claims she was manipulated by her older brother. That's a powerful narrative. I stood up and paced her office. What about all the evidence showing I wasn't at the places she claims? What about my alibi for the actual night of the murder? Laura explained the DA's perspective. Your alibi for the night Trevor died only proves you weren't there when she killed him. It doesn't prove you weren't involved in planning it. And your calendar showing you were at work during alleged meeting times doesn't prove those meetings didn't happen at other times. Vanessa is being deliberately vague about exact dates and times, which makes it harder to disprove. She'll say you met at your apartment late at night or at a park where there are no cameras. She's constructed her lie carefully. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, the media picked up the story. Local news ran headlines about siblings accused of murdering one of their spouses. My face appeared next to Vanessa's in articles describing a conspiracy to kill Trevor Boswell. My employer put me on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. Friends stopped returning my calls. My parents, devastated by both Trevor's death and the accusations against their children, couldn't decide whether to believe Vanessa's claims that I'd been involved. The night before the hearing, my father called me. His voice was strained and uncertain. Michael, I need to ask you directly. Did you help Vanessa plan Trevor's death? The question from my own father cut deeper than anything else. Dad, I swear I didn't. Vanessa is lying. I was trying to be a supportive brother and she's twisted everything to save herself. There was a long pause. Your mother and I don't know what to believe anymore. Vanessa seems so certain about what happened. She's describing specific conversations with you. Why would she lie about her own brother? I felt tears burning my eyes. Because she's facing life in prison and she's desperate. She's willing to sacrifice me to reduce her sentence. Dad, you have to believe me. I didn't help her kill Trevor. My father's voice broke. I want to believe you, but Michael, I'm your father, and I can hear when you're lying. I could always hear it. And right now, I don't hear you lying. But I also don't hear complete truth. Is there something you're not telling us? The question hung in the air. What do you mean? My father's next words chilled me. Did you know Trevor was abusing Vanessa? Did she tell you things about what was happening in that house? Because if she did, and you didn't do anything about it, maybe you feel guilty now, and that's why you sound defensive. I sat down hard on my couch. Vanessa told me Trevor was controlling, jealous. He monitored her phone and didn't want her working. But she never said he was physically abusive. If she had, I would have done something. I would have helped her leave. I would have called someone. My father was quiet. Your sister is claiming Trevor beat her, that he threatened to kill her if she left, that she was terrified for her life and you knew it. Is any of that true? My mind raced back through conversations with Vanessa. The calls where she'd cried about Trevor's behavior. The, texts where she'd said she felt trapped. Had she been telling me she was being abused and I'd missed the signs? Or was this another lie she was adding to her narrative? She never explicitly said Trevor hit her, I told my father carefully. She said he was emotionally controlling. If there was physical abuse, she didn't tell me directly. My father exhaled slowly. The prosecution is going to argue that you knew or should have known, that you encouraged Vanessa to handle the situation herself rather than go to the police or a shelter, that by supporting her in secret and agreeing to lie for her, you became complicit in whatever she was planning. He paused. Michael, I love you, but I need you to understand something. If you knew your sister was in danger and you didn't help her get out safely, if you instead helped her plan violence as a solution, That's still wrong, even if you thought you were protecting her. I felt anger rising. I didn't help her plan violence. I didn't know she was going to kill Trevor. All I did was listen to her complain about her marriage and say supportive things. That's what siblings do. The preliminary hearing the next morning was worse than I'd imagined. Vanessa took the stand looking small and frightened, dressed in a plain gray dress that made her look even younger than her 26 years. The prosecutor, Robert Finch, questioned her gently about her relationship with Trevor. She described years of escalating abuse, Trevor throwing things when angry, Trevor grabbing her arm hard enough to leave bruises, Trevor threatening to hurt her family if she left. She cried as she talked, her voice shaking. Then Finch asked about me. "Did you tell your brother Michael about what was happening?" Vanessa nodded. "I told him everything, about how scared I was, about how Trevor said he'd kill me if I left. Michael said I needed to protect myself. He said Trevor was dangerous and I needed to find a permanent solution." I wanted to stand up and scream that she was lying, but Laura's hand on my arm kept me seated. Finch continued. "Did Michael suggest specific ways you could protect yourself?" Vanessa wiped her eyes. "He said an accident would be the best way. That if Trevor died in an accident, I'd be free and no one would blame me. He said garages were dangerous places and people died in them all the time. My parents were sitting 3 rows behind me. I could feel their eyes on my back, could imagine what they were thinking." Finch showed Vanessa the text message. "Can you explain what this message means?" Vanessa's voice was steady now. "Michael sent this after we'd talked about the plan. He was reassuring me that he'd support my story afterward, that he'd tell Trevor's family I'd been a good wife and Trevor's death was a tragic accident. He said Trevor would never know we'd planned it." Finch entered the text into evidence. "Did you and Michael meet multiple times to discuss the details?" Vanessa described meetings that had never happened. Coffee at a park, where we allegedly discussed timing. Dinner at my apartment, where I supposedly explained how to position Trevor's body. A phone call where I'd coached her on what to say to 911. Every detail was specific and plausible. Every detail was completely false. When Laura cross-examined Vanessa, she pressed hard on the timeline. "You claim you met Michael at Riverside Park on September 28th to discuss the murder plan. Do you have any proof of this meeting?" Vanessa shook her head. "It was just the 2 of us. We were being careful not to leave evidence." Laura pulled out documents. Michael's phone records show his location that entire day. He was at his office until 6 p.m., then at a gym 3 miles from Riverside Park, then at his apartment. His phone never pinged a tower near the park. Vanessa didn't miss a beat. He must have left his phone somewhere else to avoid creating a digital trail. He was very careful about that. Laura's frustration showed. "And the dinner at his apartment where you claim he explained how to position Trevor's body? When did that occur?" Vanessa gave a date in early October. Laura produced credit card receipts showing I'd been at a restaurant with friends that entire evening. Vanessa adjusted her story. "Maybe I'm confused about the exact date. It was around that time. Michael and I talked so many times that specific dates blur together." This was her strategy. Keep the core accusations consistent while being vague enough about details that they couldn't be definitively disproven. If Laura challenged a specific date or location, Vanessa would claim she misremembered the exact circumstances, but the conversations had definitely happened. The judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to bind me over for trial as an accessory to murder. I was formally charged and arraigned, posting bail with money borrowed from my parents. The trial was set for 4 months away. Those 4 months were the longest of my life. I was fired from my job. My girlfriend of 2 years left me, unable to handle the public scrutiny and suspicion. I moved out of my apartment into a cheaper place across town where neighbors didn't recognize me from news coverage. My parents remained torn, wanting to believe me but shaken by Vanessa's testimony. My mother started attending Vanessa's hearings, sitting on her side of the courtroom, which felt like a knife in my heart. Laura and her team worked frantically to build my defense. We interviewed everyone I'd been in contact with during the months Vanessa claimed we were planning murder. We subpoenaed records from my employer, my bank, my credit cards, anything that could show where I'd been and what I'd been doing. We hired an expert to analyze the text messages and show they were consistent with innocent sibling communication, not conspiracy. But the prosecution had something powerful on their side. Vanessa's testimony. She was consistent in her core story. Michael knew about the abuse. Michael suggested murder as a solution. Michael provided specific instructions. Michael promised to support her afterward. Everything else, the dates and locations and exact words, those could be fuzzy. But the central narrative remained solid. The trial began on a freezing morning in January. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious spectators, and Trevor's grieving family. His parents sat in the front row, glaring at both Vanessa and me with equal hatred. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. Robert Finch described 2 siblings who'd been close their entire lives, a protective older brother and a younger sister trapped in an abusive marriage. He described how I'd encouraged Vanessa to see Trevor's death as her only escape, how I'd provided detailed instructions on staging an accident, how I'd promised to help her afterward. "The defendant may not have been in the garage when Trevor Boswell died," Finch told the jury, "but he was absolutely responsible for that death. His planning, his coaching, his support, these were essential elements of the murder. Without Michael Whitmore's guidance, Vanessa Boswell would never have killed her husband. Laura's opening was equally strong. She described a desperate woman who'd murdered her husband and was now trying to avoid full responsibility by blaming her brother. She explained how Vanessa had manipulated innocent conversations and twisted supportive messages into evidence of conspiracy. The prosecution wants you to believe that being a supportive brother is the same as being a murderer, Laura told the jury. They want you to believe that encouraging someone to leave a bad marriage is the same as telling them to commit murder. But Michael Whitmore did nothing wrong except try to help his sister through a difficult time, and now that sister is betraying him to save herself. The prosecution called Vanessa as their first witness. She spent 2 full days on the stand, describing her relationship with Trevor, the escalating abuse, and my alleged role in planning his death. She was compelling and sympathetic, crying at appropriate moments, showing genuine remorse about Trevor's death while insisting she'd been manipulated by me. When Laura cross-examined her, she tried to expose the lies. You testified that Michael told you to spill motor oil on the garage floor. Can you describe exactly how he explained this? Vanessa's answer was detailed. He said motor oil would make it look like an accident, that Trevor would slip and hit his head and everyone would think it was just a tragic fall. Laura pressed harder. And you claim this conversation happened at Michael's apartment, but Michael has provided evidence he wasn't home that night. Vanessa didn't waver. He must be mistaken about the date. Or maybe it was a different conversation. Michael and I talked about this plan many times over several weeks. I might be confused about which specific conversation included which details. Laura showed phone records proving Vanessa had searched online for how to stage an accidental death and making murder look like an accident, weeks before she claimed I'd given her those instructions. If Michael was telling you how to do this, why were you researching it yourself? Vanessa had an answer ready. Michael gave me general guidance, but I wanted to make sure I understood everything. I was scared and wanted to be certain the plan would work. Every question Laura asked, Vanessa had an explanation. Every piece of evidence Laura presented, Vanessa incorporated into her narrative. She was an accomplished liar, and the jury was listening to every word. The prosecution called other witnesses to support Vanessa's story. Trevor's co-worker testified that Trevor had mentioned his wife's brother seemed overly involved in their marriage, calling and texting constantly. A neighbor testified she'd seen me at Vanessa and Trevor's house several times in the months before his death, looking intense and serious. My own text messages and phone records were entered as evidence, each supportive message reframed as sinister planning. When the prosecution rested, Laura called me to the stand. I'd been dreading this moment for months. Robert Finch would cross-examine me, and I knew he'd try to make me look guilty with my own words. Laura's direct examination was straightforward. She had me explain my relationship with Vanessa, the conversations we'd had about her marriage, my genuine shock when Trevor died. I testified that I'd never suggested violence, never discussed staging an accident, never agreed to help cover up a murder. The text message about covering for Vanessa was about a ceramics class, I explained to the jury. She told me Trevor was being controlling about her hobbies. She wanted to take a class, but he'd forbidden it. She asked if I'd back up her story that she was at my place if he called checking on her. I said yes because it seemed like a small thing to help her pursue an interest. Finch's cross-examination was brutal. He started with the text message. Mr. Whitmore, you testified this message was about a ceramics class. But there was no class that night, was there? I'd been prepared for this. Vanessa told me there was a class. I didn't verify it. I took my sister at her word. Finch showed the jury Vanessa's purchase of murder supplies that same night. So while you thought you were covering for an innocent hobby, your sister was actually buying materials to kill her husband. That's quite a coincidence. I struggled to explain. I didn't know what she was really doing. She lied to me. Finch moved closer. You've testified that Vanessa told you about Trevor's controlling behavior, his jealousy, his monitoring of her phone. These are all signs of an abusive relationship, correct? I nodded. Yes, but I didn't know how serious it was. Finch's voice hardened. You didn't know? Or you didn't want to know? Because it's convenient now to claim ignorance, but the evidence shows you and Vanessa talked 27 times in the month before Trevor's death. Are you telling this jury that in 27 conversations, your sister never communicated the severity of what she was experiencing? I felt trapped. She talked about feeling controlled and unhappy, but she never said Trevor was physically hurting her. She never said she feared for her life. Finch showed the jury records of Vanessa's visits to emergency rooms and urgent care clinics over the past 2 years. Bruises, a sprained wrist, a black eye. Each time she'd given explanations about being clumsy or having accidents. Your sister was being beaten regularly enough to require medical care. And you expect this jury to believe you had no idea? I felt my defense crumbling. If I'd known Trevor was hurting her, I would have helped her leave. I would have called the police. I would have done something legitimate, not help her commit murder. Finch smiled coldly. Or maybe you did help her do something. Maybe you decided the justice system wouldn't protect your sister fast enough. Maybe you thought taking matters into your own hands was the right solution. And maybe you're not as innocent as you're claiming. The cross-examination continued for 3 more hours. Finch twisted every answer I gave, made every innocent action sound suspicious, framed my relationship with Vanessa as codependent and potentially conspiratorial. When I finally stepped down from the stand, I felt like I'd been beaten. Laura tried to rebuild my credibility with other witnesses. She called friends who testified I'd never expressed violent thoughts or suggested harming Trevor. She called my former employer, who confirmed I'd been a reliable employee with no history of concerning behavior. She called the expert, who analyzed the text messages and concluded they were consistent with normal sibling communication. But I could see the jury wasn't fully convinced. They'd heard Vanessa's detailed testimony. They'd seen evidence that I'd agreed to lie for her. They'd watched Finch make me look evasive and defensive on the stand. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Closing arguments were scheduled for a Friday morning. Laura worked on her closing statement late into the night before, trying to find the perfect words to convince the jury I was innocent. I sat in my apartment staring at the wall, trying to prepare myself for a guilty verdict and the years in prison that would follow. Then, at 2 a.m., my phone rang. It was Laura. "Michael, you need to get to my office right now. Something's happened." I drove through empty streets to her downtown office building. Laura met me in the lobby, her expression a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "Vanessa's former roommate just came forward. Her name is Alexis Coleman, and she has information that changes everything." We went up to Laura's office, where a young woman in her late 20s was sitting nervously. Alexis explained that she'd lived with Vanessa for 2 years before Vanessa married Trevor. They'd been close friends and roommates, sharing an apartment downtown. "I've been following the trial in the news," Alexis said, "and I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Vanessa is lying about everything, about Trevor, about you, about why she killed him." Laura leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Alexis pulled out her phone and showed us screenshots she'd saved, text messages between her and Vanessa from 2 years ago, before Vanessa had even met Trevor. The messages were shocking. Vanessa had written about wanting to find a wealthy man to marry, specifically someone who worked in a skilled trade with his own business and assets. She'd described her plan to marry someone older and established, wait a few years, then arrange an accident so she'd inherit everything. I felt ice in my veins. "She planned this before she even met Trevor?" Alexis nodded. "Vanessa was obsessed with the idea. She'd read about women who inherited money after their husbands died in accidents. She did research on which types of accidents were hardest to prove weren't accidents. She talked about it constantly. I thought she was just fantasizing, venting about being broke and tired of struggling. I didn't think she'd actually do it." Laura was taking notes frantically. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Alexis looked ashamed. "I moved out of state for a job right before Vanessa met Trevor. We lost touch. I didn't even know she'd gotten married until I saw the trial on the news. And when I realized it was the same Vanessa, I couldn't believe it. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood her back then, that the messages were just dark humor. But watching her testimony, hearing how calculated everything was, I knew I had to tell someone." Laura examined the screenshots. "These messages are from Vanessa's phone number?" Alexis confirmed. "Yes, and I have the original messages still on my phone. Nothing has been altered or deleted." Laura looked at me. "This proves premeditation going back years. It shows Vanessa specifically sought out a husband to kill for inheritance money. It completely destroys her narrative about being an abused wife who killed in self-defense with your help." Alexis continued. "There's more. About 6 months before Trevor died, Vanessa reached out to me. We met for coffee when she was visiting her parents in town. She told me she'd married an electrician with his own business and a paid-off house. She said the timing was almost right. I asked what she meant, and she just smiled. At the time, I thought she was being weird. Now I realized she was telling me she was getting ready to kill him. I felt rage and relief in equal measure. Can she testify? Will the judge allow this evidence at this stage of the trial? Laura was already calling the judge's emergency line. "We're going to file a motion first thing in the morning. This is newly discovered evidence that goes directly to the heart of the case. The judge has to hear it." The emergency hearing happened at 8 a.m., before closing arguments were scheduled to begin. Laura presented Alexis and her evidence. The judge reviewed the text messages, interviewed Alexis about their authenticity, and listened to the prosecution's objections. Robert Finch argued that the evidence was too prejudicial and hadn't been disclosed during discovery because we hadn't known about it. But the judge disagreed. "This evidence directly contradicts the defendant's sister's testimony about her motive and mental state. The jury has a right to hear it." Alexis took the stand that morning. She testified about her friendship with Vanessa, the conversations about finding and killing a wealthy husband, and Vanessa's comments 6 months before Trevor's death about the timing being almost right. The jury listened in stunned silence. Finch tried to discredit Alexis on cross-examination. "Isn't it convenient that you suddenly remember these conversations now that your former roommate's brother is on trial?" Alexis didn't back down. "I came forward because I watched Vanessa lie on that stand. I watched her try to destroy an innocent man to save herself. I couldn't let that happen." Finch showed the jury the timeline. "These alleged text messages are from 2 years before Trevor's death. People say stupid things when they're young. It doesn't mean they follow through." Alexis pulled out more evidence. I have messages from 3 months before Trevor died. Vanessa texted me saying, "Remember that plan we talked about? It's almost time. Wish me luck." I still have that message. I saved it because it seemed ominous. The prosecution requested a recess to verify Alexis's claims. Digital forensics experts were called to examine her phone and confirm the messages were authentic and unaltered. The verification took 2 days. When court reconvened, the experts confirmed everything Alexis had presented was genuine. Vanessa had indeed sent messages describing a plan to marry and murder someone for money, dating back years before she'd met Trevor. The judge recalled Vanessa to the stand for additional questioning. Finch looked defeated as his key witness took the stand again. Laura questioned her directly. "Ms. Boswell, did you know Alexis Coleman 2 years ago?" Vanessa couldn't deny it. "Yes, we were roommates." Laura showed the messages. "Did you send these messages describing a plan to marry someone and arrange their death?" Vanessa's face went pale. "Those messages are taken out of context. I was joking. Alexis and I had a dark sense of humor." Laura pressed. "Did you text Alexis 3 months before Trevor's death saying your plan was almost ready?" Vanessa's voice shook. "I don't remember sending that." Laura showed the forensic report. "The experts confirmed you did. Can you explain what plan you were referring to?" Vanessa broke down on the stand. "I was desperate. Trevor wasn't the perfect husband I thought he'd be. He was controlling and mean. I married him thinking he'd provide security, but instead he trapped me. I needed a way out." Laura's voice was hard. "So you killed him for money and freedom, then tried to frame your brother as an accomplice to reduce your sentence." Vanessa sobbed. "I didn't know what else to do. Michael had been so supportive, and when I got caught, I thought if I said he helped me, maybe I'd get a lighter sentence. Maybe the jury would see me as a victim who'd been manipulated." The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Vanessa's confession hung in the air, destroying every claim she'd made about my involvement. The jury looked horrified. Trevor's parents were crying. My parents sat in shock. I felt like I was watching from outside my body, unable to process that this nightmare was finally ending. The prosecution requested a recess to consult with their superiors. When court reconvened hours later, Robert Finch addressed the judge. "Your Honor, in light of the newly discovered evidence and Ms. Boswell's testimony this afternoon, the state is dismissing all charges against Michael Whitmore. It's clear he had no involvement in planning or executing Trevor Boswell's murder. The judge formally dismissed the charges. I was free. But I didn't feel free. I felt hollowed out, destroyed by months of being accused of murder by my own sister." Laura hugged me, her relief palpable. "It's over. You're exonerated." My parents approached cautiously. My mother was crying. "Michael, I'm so sorry we doubted you." I looked at them both, these people who'd raised me, but hadn't fully believed my innocence. "She almost sent me to prison. Your daughter, my sister, was willing to destroy my life to save herself." My father reached for my arm, but I pulled away. We didn't know what to believe. Vanessa was so convincing. I felt anger I'd been suppressing for months. "I'm your son. You should have believed me without question. Instead, you sat with her in court, supported her, while I was facing life in prison for something I didn't do." There was nothing more to say. I walked out of the courthouse into cold January air, free, but fundamentally changed. Vanessa was sentenced 3 months later to life in prison without parole. The evidence of premeditation and her attempt to frame me for the crime eliminated any possibility of leniency. 5 years later, I'd rebuilt my career with a different architecture firm, married a woman who'd believed in my innocence from the start, and started a family of my own. I never spoke to Vanessa again, never responded to the letters she sent from prison apologizing and begging for forgiveness. My relationship with my parents remained strained, cordial, but never fully healed. They'd chosen doubt when I needed their faith, and that betrayal, though smaller than Vanessa's, had left its own permanent scar. But I'd survived. Vanessa had tried to sacrifice me to avoid her own consequences and failed. Justice had been delayed but ultimately served, and I'd learned the hard way that family loyalty has limits when someone is willing to watch you burn to save themselves. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.